everybody, and welcome to the Open Network User Group podcast. I'm Mark Tierney, ONUG CTO, and today is the third in a series for the Network Cloud Working Group, where we've been highlighting key points from the team's Network Cloud Playbook. That's available at onug.net. Go to the Collaboration tab, find the Network Cloud Working Group, and you'll be able to see a lot of the collateral that's been put out by that team. All right, today, the power of APIs, how to build network cloud APIs and automation for today's complex multi-cloud environment. All right, but first, ONUG Fall 2022, we just had a great spring event, but ONUG Fall 2022 is going to be even better. It will also be a hybrid event. It's at Center 415 on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan on October 19th and 20th this year. That's fall, October 19th and 20th, 2022. Join the ONUG community of Global 2000 companies, enterprise architects, cloud providers, and thought leaders as we explore the building blocks required to create flexible, transformative IT business platforms. You can go to onug.net to register for this event today. All right, joining me for today's event, today's podcast, Steve Wood, Principal Engineer, Enterprise Architect for Cisco Architecture. William Collins, he's the Principal Cloud Architect at Alkira. Mike Krygeris, he is the Solutions Engineer at Kentik. Missing in action is Nuno Fiera. He's the Field CTO from F5 Altera. If Nuno shows up, we're going to bring him in, and we'll batter him after the fact. All right, before we get started, Steve, I just want to point out that this team, and you're the leader of this team, this working group, did such a great job at ONUG Spring. And I don't know why I was surprised, but I'm pleasantly surprised that on day two, as sort of the conference winds down, sometimes, people are tired, and yet this team had the fifth overall greatest attendance on the working group report out. I mean, I think you guys have so much to be proud of. Everyone is interested in this team's message. What's your take on that? What do you think drives that, man?
I think that's great, because I know that we're pumped about what we're doing here. We're pumped about the changes that are going on in the network and how we deliver the networks, and where we're going to take that in the future is super exciting. So I think people are kind of keying in on that. It's like, hey, we see a lot of stuff going on. Where is it going to take us? What do we have to do? Take advantage of these trends, right? Because it's very different than how people are used to building networks in the past. And I know when I talk to customers, when I first talk about, programmable underlays and the ability to build, sort of a network or an aggregation site on demand, they still don't quite get it. It's like, okay, I have to put a rack where in some colo. It's like, no, you don't have to do any of that, right? And, that's just the beginning, right? When we start talking about, API-driven services, we can go so much. I think it's very exciting. I think people are kind of keying in on that excitement.
Yeah. So, by the way, I want to go back a little bit and just point out we've done two in this podcast series already, and all of this was oriented, just a level set for those who haven't tuned in previously. This team, led by Steve, has put out a network playbook, and it's all about elasticity in today's network cloud. And so the first in the series we talked about. What does network cloud mean, and what does elasticity mean? What's business value? What's the, what are the architectures that support those business values? And then the second one was, really, around transformation. Like, how do we engage into this space, and how do we think about the landscape, and whether it's cloud, cloud, on-prem, off-prem, IoT edge, whatever it is. How do we approach those things? Again, all drawing off of the playbook that this team created. But I'll tell you, there's an awful lot of energy today, William, around this notion of APIs and being more intentional in the network with how we adopt and implement APIs. Give us, your thoughts about, because you did a lot in the playbook, in leading the, the editorial comments in the playbook about APIs. Give us your thoughts about, the importance of APIs today.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, there is a ton of energy in this group. In fact, when I exercise, I listen to like all of our old recordings to really get me pumped up. It's
Our
good
greatest
stuff.
hits.
Yeah, it's what gets me up in the morning. So
Nice.
yeah, but yeah, APIs, you can't go into any conversation in the enterprise today without at least discussing automation, APIs, and building a strategy around it, building governance around it, building security, versioning, secrets management, from end to end, not just a single development team doing things for some cloud product that your enterprise started some time ago, but taking these principles and applying them to the whole of all your infrastructure. And of course, this started on the application front, and then cloud adoption, infrastructure as code, having these tools like Terraform that have SDKs that interact with these backend APIs to interface with these infrastructure providers and deploy infrastructure, like taking these and making them consumable for the average enterprise. So a lot of fire, a lot of synergy, and just a lot of work being done with this right now.
So you mentioned Terraform. Maybe let's take a step back, and Steve, maybe start us off, and I'd like to hear from Mike too. But what's the starting point here? It's not like we don't have any programmable or APIs today in the network, but what, maybe just level set a
Sure.
bit and lay down a little context for where we are, because that'll help us understand where we need to go.
Right. So I think there's kind of two things that when you look at API-driven networks where we are today. So we talked about this in at ONUG Spring. There's kind of the Terraform world. I have a controller. I have APIs into my controller. Now I can basically build a network or build services on top of my network using Terraform and provide Terraform providers and basically infrastructure as code methods to essentially configure my network and my network services in a way that's immutable, in a way that's repeatable, and in a way where I know positively what the state of my network is, and if it drifts, I can bring it back in. And that's a huge value, for customers who run large and medium scale networks, just to know, what the state of their network is. So that there's a level of automation there that I think is kind of step one. And then step two for APIs is more when we think about API driven network services that are loosely coupled. So, for example, what we do today with software-defined interconnect provider, cloud interconnect providers like Megaport, like Equinix, where they have exposed APIs into their network services that allow us to build connections, build network connections up using just RESTful API calls. So now I can build applications on top of that, whether it's an SD-WAN overlay application, whether it's a security application. That's kind of phase two, or the next phase, where I think we're taking this network cloud working group, right? The idea being that now, instead of kind of building the full stack network, as I kind of hit on before, hey, I'm racking my own gear, I'm doing all the traditional things I do when I build a network. Now I can start thinking about, hey, well, that network is owned by that person over there, and they expose these services, and I have an overlay that I'd like to run over that because I need to get to resources that are on the other side. I just want to basically do loosely coupled API call into that to use those services. Now I don't have to worry about building that network which I'm using to connect anymore. And I still have the control that I need to get to places I want to go and to build the things I need to build fast. That's the power of network cloud. And I think that's where we want to head, where we're heading with this working group. It's very exciting, new area.
So let me put Mike on the spot. So Mike, you've got a pretty unique point of view in this space, at least in my opinion. You do. Without putting Kentik in a box, you have a strong observability play, right? You're your products and services are in a position to take action or enable action in an observability. From an observability point of view, what's your take on APIs and their importance, particularly with from your chair?
Yeah, no, I think it's that's a good question. In terms of like the observability side of things, I think the API interaction is in its nascent phase right now. I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of taking the data that we're collecting and we're analyzing and using that to help make decisions as to what to do on a network. So, on the Kentik side of things, one of the main use cases that we use, and I guess you could call, an API or BGP an API, is to use BGP to mitigate DDoS attacks. So that's a huge thing. But we can also do things like identifying things that are anomalies within the network, and building ACLs, or maybe use that information that we're collecting to understand a zero trust network environment. So, maybe you're not in a zero trust network environment and that's where you want to be. Well, you have to know what the traffic is, or you have to understand what's needed in order to build that. You can't just do what you think is the right thing. So there's a lot of really exciting things that we can do. And then the other type of API information is to be able to take the data in and add that to the data that we're collecting. So, so legacy, SNMP or flow data that's coming in, and being able to augment that with other data that's coming from other platforms. So, if you have an IP address, there's a host name that's associated with there. There might be a username that's associated. So being able to take that data in real time, ingest that along with like the flow data or the SNMP data or whatever is going on, and being able to give that information to maybe some other process that may be doing machine learning or something like that, creates a really, really powerful feedback loop in an automated system. So when you start talking about, hyper automation type of things, you really have to have that feedback loop in order to keep improving that system or taking action. So I'm really excited to be in this space with this, because I feel like people that are in the observability realm, hold the ability to help people execute this. And I don't think you can do that without that information. So yeah, my long-winded response to that question.
No, it's good. I like it because it speaks to in the important operational, and I love the term hyperautomation. Yes, Gartner term that's being pushed around a lot more, and actually ONUG is going to be tackling inside of our orchestration automation working group. So I love that you brought it up. But William, juxtaposed to maybe the operational context, we've got to deploy these systems, right? We've got to create and deploy them. You mentioned Terraform in your earlier comment. Maybe take a step back and talk. What does that mean? I'm not a developer. I'm not even a DevOps person by practice. I understand it all, but why don't you Steve, feel free to chime in, but give us a sense of what that means when you say Terraform. What does that mean in terms of implementing API-driven environments in the enterprise?
Sure, good question. Before I answer that, I want to say something to the point of observability is when you think about like large scale migrations too, this is another big one. At the same time that an enterprise is going through this, I know overused word, digital and transformation slammed together, but they're doing a lot of migrations. Some companies may have like 500 to 3,000 apps and like an aggressive strategy to migrate them because they have a data center lease coming up and they want to get out of maybe one or two of their data centers. So having that observability, like identifying the traffic, what is the capacity of your current infrastructure? Can you even, how much data do you have in that data center? How are you going to get it there? What are the traffic volumes? Are there spikes? All these different pieces of information. Data is good. Data is really good, but you've got to be able to look at it, both short term and long term.
Yeah, not to pull you off sides, but we have several ONUG members that bring up the issue of mergers and acquisitions and how it affects that, right? In other words, that now I just bought another company, or and now I've got to pull them into the fold. And I hear the story that you just mentioned and Mike's mentioned before. I've actually heard him talk about it in other settings, a number of times. The M&A piece is big. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to pull you off sides, but I would like to hear more about the kind of the implementation from a DevOps perspective of NetOps perspective, if you will, on or dev NetOps perspective
You can call it
on
whatever
getting
you
these
want to
things
call it
implemented,
at this point.
right?
Yeah, so I mean, what Terraform is just, it's basically broke down into two pieces. You have Terraform Core, which is open source. You can go look at the code on GitHub if you want. And that's basically your entry point in. And then you have plugins that are written by vendors like AWS and Alkira that expose and initialize the libraries used to make these API calls. And this is done using a SDK, or a software dev kit. So what I mean to say is Terraform is just an easy way to organize, model, and provision infrastructure using existing vendor APIs. Kind of sits in the middle. And the whole point of, if you look back at the way that things were configured traditionally in the enterprise, you may have some, a few sets of firewalls, you may have some routers, you may have all these pieces of disparate pockets of hardware and technology everywhere, and you have different ways of going in and making changes. You have a change control process. You have a lot of different moving pieces. So one of the big benefits of using something like Terraform with infrastructure as code, using like a CI/CD process, is taking these things and building like one way to do something, but you're building it in a smaller change. We know that big changes, like when you go through the change control process and you're like, okay, I'm going to fit in like 10 changes into this window. And then the cab is like, nah, hold on a minute. We need to have like 10 more cab calls. And, that's never fun. So breaking things into smaller changes and then orchestrating them all with CI/CD and getting the same outcome like every single time is a big benefit, big value. And it ultimately leads to a more reliable infrastructure as well.
Yeah, I think once you get the programmatic part of it in place and you get the bugs out, you remove the human element to some extent, right? So I think there's that part of it, but there's also if you think about this, it's not the first time people have done automation in the enterprise for deploying deploying networks, right? But in the past, it's always been stovepipe, specific implementation, hard coded to the devices that were there, with all the various difference, very brittle infrastructure that was being built and hard to maintain, hard to change. Well, the thing that what Terraform and other tools like this bring is an element of abstraction. So I have my network model, my device models, my providers, right? I can have, as long as you have vendors that provide providers for all of the different devices in your network, you can do kind of platform independent, automation for that, right? And that really helps you to leverage your automation infrastructure from generation to generation and as well. So that's a big change in the way people used to kind of do, let's call it script or software based automation in the past.
100%.
And so, and so these APIs fit, the whole API, the whole API thing fits right into this, right? Because you can think about that, you can build API calls in to make these changes right into your, into your infrastructure, and that's, that's working at sort of the element level, the configuration level I was talking about before.
Yeah, and that's the game changer about Terraform, I think, is the fact that you have that abstraction layer and you don't have to have somebody learning 7 different APIs, that some of which might be REST, some of them may be whatever, but you don't have to worry about that. Somebody else worried about that. They built that plugin, and now you could just like leverage that. So having one person instead of 6 to do that sort of work is important.
And versioning things, like if you're using a general purpose programming language, I ran into this in real life. So, oh boy. So,
hey, Mark, you muted yourself, bud.
I
was just saying that as opposed to you did it in real life as opposed to this podcast, which is all fake.
So serious, true story. So back in the day, we did, I mean, it would be roughly kind of what CI/CD would kind of be, but we interacted with APIs directly, mainly like F5 load balancers, Riverbed steelheads, different devices that had APIs exposed, REST primarily. And we built our own Python stuff to, I would say we automated like maybe 80% of what we would do on F5s, like across the board. It was a lot. And this was quite a while back, so we were pretty ahead of the curve there. But guess what happens when, the version of Python gets updated on all the servers that you have in your enterprise with these OS upgrades, and you can't go back. You end up breaking a lot of stuff, and then you're scrambling to either build new stuff or figure out a way to fix it. And at that time, we weren't exactly software developers. We were okay. Like, we were writing functions and classes, and it was okay, but we're not software developers. So what happens then when like this whole thing of where we had 80% of it automated goes down to like 10%? That means a human is having to log in to the F5 UI and do these things manually, which is, no fun.
Yeah, for sure.
And risky.
Yes.
Right. So I was making fun earlier about, the confusion around, DevOps, DevNetOps, NetOps, right? But this is all, and you've already mentioned the, CI/CD pipeline, but, to a certain extent, my observation, for what it's worth, is that, the network space and NetOps teams are kind of catching up in the DevOps world. Hopefully not having to relearn some of those lessons, William. It sounds like you're suggesting those lessons are still being learned out there, by the network teams. But I do feel like there's a huge opportunity where maybe network more than some other environments can take advantage of these new processes from a governance perspective, right? I introduce APIs, I introduce process, I introduce CI/CD processes in support of DevNetOps, and I've solved some other issues under the hood, these governance issues. What any opinions on that, Steve? Let's start with you on if do you have a view of that world at all?
I do have a view of it. It's not as as developed as maybe others on the call, but I think we saw a lot of this discussion happening at ONUG spring this year, right? The idea of policy as code, right? So the idea that I can create corporate governance rules, I can document them, but I need to translate those into action, right? And I need to know that they got translated. So it's one thing to create the rules, then you got to convert the rules into some implementation on your infrastructure. So that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is actually verifying that what I wanted to get done got done. So the compliance part, and that's where I think the ideas of policy as code, infrastructure as code really help, right? So you can think about Terraform from a security perspective as essentially a software way, a defined way of basically coding enterprise security rules, and then verifying that the compliance is actually in place. You can go through and serve and basically query things to make sure that those rules are actually in place. And I think that's been a key problem for our enterprise users for like many years that now has a chance to be solved.
Mike, you got any feedback on the governance side? Is that any of your work?
No, I think that does boil down to that abstraction layer. Like the more of an abstraction layer we have between proprietary SDKs and proprietary APIs, the better a chance we have at being able to make changes and then confirm that they worked. That's really what Terraform to me is. That's the magic of that, is that you have that sort of standardized methodology to do whatever it is going to do and make sure that it's working. And then on the observability side, you can take it another step further and triple check to make sure that everything is working the way that it should be. Because, once you see that, okay, there's a deny on that firewall, or, this flow is allowed from point A to point B, or being able to use that to model where traffic is allowed to go is a really powerful thing, in my opinion. So, yeah, the abstraction layer in terms of the governance is sort of the magic secret sauce, especially now that people want best of breed. They want multi-vendor environments. People aren't looking for a single vendor solution if it doesn't contain all of the best of breed in terms of what they're looking for. No offense to Steve, I know it's all best of breed at Cisco, but Some people may have different needs, right?
Oh,
Welcome to the Network Cloud working group.
There you go.
Where all the love gets thrown around. Okay, so Mike started talking about governance, and then he mentioned security, right? So let's slip into that, right? All this stuff is just naturally secure, right? There, you don't have to worry. We self-documenting code and naturally secure APIs. That's what we're dealing with. No. So what's the zero trust story in APIs? Do we have a plan? Do we have solutions that pass muster? William, you're smiling the loudest, so I'll start with you on that.
I just realized why Nuno's not on this call. It's because he didn't want to debate me in this round.
Hey, that's his loss.
Yeah, so security is gigantic here, and I think I think this is fundamentally two different problems to solve. So one is how you interface with said API, how secrets are managed, how they're rotated. Let's call this accessing the API. And next is what you can do with that API. Now I know you just said least privilege or zero trust or whatever it was. And, we've been talking about this since I've been working in technology, it would seem. And somehow things seem to squeak into production always. And I think the future and where this is going, and there's actually a lot of data to support this as well out there. But instead of treating this as a reactive exercise, things have to shift left and get checked and validated before they make it through a build. So what I mean by this is this should come down to, a developer submits a pull request to source control. And, that version control system has policy enforcement built in. So it's going to go through and it's going to check, okay, developer A submitted this pull request. This is our policy for this resource or this object or this infrastructure. We're going to automatically fail it before it even gets into source control because it's bad. It left this open or it did this, or, you can get very granular here and model this after your organization's compliance. And, if you're healthcare, it's PHI, if you're financial services, PCI, whatever it is that's important to you as an organization, it's on you at this point to make sure to the best of your ability that it can never get in source control to begin with. And that's what I think we've known, and we've realized that fighting security issues in cloud reactively is, got a list of problems. I mean, how much time do you have? It would take forever to go through them. It's just not effective. So I think that's where this whole thing is going.
Yeah, so I've got a little, I've got an additional take on this. I mean, clearly you're developing APIs. You want strong authentication, strong authorization. You want to be able to know what APIs you're exposing. So you need inventory to kind of manage and take care of that. Privilege of least principle, principle of least privilege that William was talking about. You want to encrypt using TLS, so HTTPS. Those are kind of standard mechanisms that we use. But if you think about where we want to go with network cloud, we're starting to think about a lot of services that might be exposed to public access, right? So the cloud, we're used to that, right? We go to Amazon, we go to Azure, we go to Google. All the APIs are open and public, right? That's another level of security they have to think about. You have to think about distributed denial of service attacks and how to protect against those, right? And then, how do I do strong authentication of my API? How do I, have IAM users for least privilege? The good news, I think, there is that those problems have been solved in the cloud. And I think that those methods that are used are very much translatable into what we're doing. So if I'm, an AT&T or, one day, a Comcast or somebody who wants to expose my network to public, in a public open way to allow people to start using it. And, of course, I'm going to bill for that too, right? So as a commercial API, those are the kinds of protections I'm going to want in place, right? And so I think that's coming. I think that's going to happen. So the private API, we're dealing with those today, but the public APIs, the cloud folks have dealt with, and I think we'll see in the network as we move towards more network cloud type of open APIs, commercial APIs, we're going to need those mechanisms as well.
So, Steve, you talk a lot about, and I've heard you say it in in working group meetings before about building your snowflake, right? And this, the context of this discussion is about using, or often it's using these APIs for nuts and bolts configuration of your network. Is that it? Is that the whole story? I mean, I feel like we've already bumped up against these notions of governance, of policy as code. I mean, there's more to it than just building your particular snowflake, right?
Absolutely, and that I think is the more powerful part of this whole story, right? So if you think about the future, when I want to build, I'm going to market, I need to build some new infrastructure, some new network capability, or some new way to roll an application out to people, right? In the future, do I want to do all the parts of that stack? If you think about, for example, why do people use the internet? Well, I use the internet because I don't want to deal with the network, right? To some extent. But you can't always use the internet. It's not always going to have what you need. It's not going to always be the right thing. But if you look at that, think about network cloud, the types of services that can be exposed at the network layer, exposed through loosely coupled APIs that I can just use to call. So imagine if I can call from my application a specific network API, or call a controller that calls a specific network API that connects me to the cloud in a private way with low latency and all the maybe some geo fencing type of paths. Things that allow me to basically differentiate my application service across the network. Those are the kinds of APIs I think are the future. The same way you would build an application today using loosely coupled APIs. So if I was going to build a GPS biking app, I'm not going to build a mapping system into it. I'm going to just call Google APIs and use Google Maps, right? Same idea is going to come, I think, to the network. So you're going to see that in the future, enterprises will use specific services from specific network providers that are providing network services. They will be called via the enterprise orchestrator or APIs, or by the CI/CD pipeline, to basically build that that new snowflake where I'm not necessarily building all the infrastructure that's in between me and my my resource of interest, but I'm leveraging what somebody else has built. That's going to be huge because I can build things a lot faster that way, right? I'll give you an example. Like, if building a managed service for SD-WAN, I'm willing you could probably attest to this, right? You're building a managed service for SD-WAN with a service provider. That might take quite a while to roll out by the time the service provider tests and gets the infrastructure in place and develops a portal. But you can work with Equinix or a Megaport or a Packet Fabric or something like that. You can run sort of a full end-to-end overlay service on top of a network that connects you to almost any cloud. You can develop that in a couple quarters at most, right? And so that's the kind of acceleration we're talking about in the development side. And then the on-demand nature of all this for the enterprise user is the key. You can now take advantage of these automation capabilities to deploy your networks on demand in minutes.
So when I hear you all talk about this, I'll just give a shameless plug to an image that ONUG has, but it's representative of what our customers ask for ONUG to work on, and it's this idea of connect, secure, observe, and automate. And we have this like image logo of those four things, right? But then around them, like a nurturing mother, William. Like a nurturing mother is governance and compliance and these sorts of things that I feel like all those layers, connect, secure, observe, automate, compliance, governance, these are all things we need APIs for, right? To be able to operate our businesses, safely, efficiently, whatever. Any thoughts on that? Am I missing any? Like, maybe I need to update the logo. Like, are there you think there's aspects of our business that we need to be thinking about that goes beyond those six things: connect, secure, observe, automate, compliance, governance? What am I missing? What are we missing in the API story?
all these things are great things, and they're things that enterprises need to worry about and, give a lot of attention to. But one of the biggest things that I lived through in, a few different enterprises was it's, the technology's there. The technology's available to us, but you have a business that's been around since, before the 90s. And there's so much internal mechanics, even org structure, all these things in place that really throw a wrench in like moving this cultural shift forward. I think culture, I think I said it on the last podcast we did, but I think culture plays probably a bigger role than any of those things. It has to start there. And if it's not there, then a lot of these things are not going to be as successful as they could be.
Yeah, that's fair. Mike,
go ahead.
Let me go to Mike on this. Mike, are you seeing that as well? Are you seeing culture at all getting in the way?
Yeah,
enterprises trying to implement.
That's a huge thing. Is there's always this is the way that we've always done it, right? And people kind of want to do the things the way that they've always done them. And right now, I think the shift in how things are being done in the pace I've never seen. I'd say things were changing at a pace that was maybe this rapid back in around 2000. When I was working back at Cabletron, and there was the migration off of Token Ring and FTDI, and we were going to Ethernet. Yeah, that was me. I was there. But
I think one year I worked at a company where we gave away like Big Mac 16s for bonuses or something like.
And
when it was called Mac 8s and Mac 12s,
the Mac 8, the Mac Plus, and
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it was good stuff. They even tried their hand at SD-WAN, back then, and
as Steve chuckles under
it was not a very good. So they go secure. I gotta go back.
Cisco
Secure fast virtual networking
crushed
I
the
knew that
hopes
wasn't
and
good.
dreams of Cabletron employees.
Yeah, because they're like, oh, you don't need to route. So so they had a big big anti-Cisco campaign against Cisco Catalyst switches, and we all know how that turned out. So that their secure fast networking was it was the first SDN, not SD-WAN but SDN that I'd ever seen. It was really along the lines. It was supposed to work the same way, and it did to a certain degree, except for when it didn't. And then you're running a series of dams, and you have a problem, and the support engineer tells you that you have to reboot all of your chassis, all 16 of your fully populated chassis on your power plant. So that was so that didn't work out very well because that didn't fly. I think now we're in a place where things are more stable.
Or are we in a place where culture? We were talking about culture before I drew you offside.
Yeah, so people don't want to change. They want to stay. They want to do the same thing, and they really have to be sold on the ability to save themselves some work. Like you don't want to have to go and copy and paste the same config into 50 routers. Like you just want to be able to push a button and deploy code and understand that. And I think there needs to be a bit of a change in the culture and management and embracing that, and having the people that run those networks embrace that stuff. Or because if you don't have it, the culture, it has to start from the top. And if you don't have that starting from the top, then you're not going to move in that direction. So I think that culture is a huge part of. So
that was going to be my next question, Steve. Is how do enterprises start to deliver on this vision? I'd say technically read the playbook that this team's produced. But what's your thought on a great place to start?
So I think that's a pretty good place to start. I think the first thing you need to do is kind of understand what the changes that are going on in the network with respect to how networks were built in the past, to what's going on and how the WAN is built today, right? And how the cloud providers and the SaaS providers are influencing the path of your packets in the network. And then you have to realize where are the most important parts of the network for you to send your traffic, and where it is going to be the most likely place that you're going to peer with other people, right? It used to be at IXPs, but now it's not, right? To some extent. And now, so I think that helps you kind of get grounded. The white paper helps you get grounded there. And then, then from there, kind of talk about, okay, what does that mean for your deployments? How should you be thinking about building my network in the future to take advantage of automation, abstraction, to basically kind of outsource some of the stuff that you might have done before, right? So maybe you were, working with a, your own WAN or building your own custom WAN in the past. Well, now you have, WAN as a service providers out there that can really, change the equation for you. In terms of how you build the network much more quickly and not have to be as hands-on with that. And I think taking sort of work out of the enterprise IT professionals' hands is super important at the low level, because they do need, as an IT professionals, to be more thinking about some of the stuff we were just talking about, which is, okay, how do I learn how to write software to program my network rather than configuration? And why? Because we want repeatable infrastructure. And so what you see is software development, modern software practices and principles being applied to the network, building the network itself. It's coming from software-defined data center. Those concepts and ideas were developed first there by software designers, and we see that now coming to enterprise WAN and as well. And so that wave is going to wash over us, and it's going to make things simpler and easier in some ways. But I think you have to start thinking about, how do I start taking some of the things that I used to build before, maybe using buying a service and connecting to that service with an API instead of building it myself, in order to basically move faster, right? And I think that's good. That's where the white paper can help people out as well, to get kind of grounded in those basic architectural ideas in order to know how to kind of, how to attack the problem.
Do you think
William,
that's
I see
part
you
of the
nodding
skills
a lot.
gap? Or
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike. I apologize. Go ahead.
oh yeah, no, I was asking Steve, like, so taking on a different service, do you think there's the compelling reason for that is a skills gap, or is it just that people are just they're too busy to do that stuff?
Well, it's hard to say, right? I mean, I hear, my feeling listening to the, and seeing the different things I've seen out there is that there's a couple of things. I don't think it's necessarily a skills gap. I believe people out there are more than capable in the IT world of learning new things, right? What I do see is that, where's the infrastructure? Where's this, the technology spend going, right? So when the technology spend goes more towards cloud, the cloud and data center side, it means less for the network. So it means you have less resources to apply. So you need to find ingenious ways now of doing things that you would have built yourself before that you're not going to be able to do now, right? And the other thing is the time to market pressure. It's not going to be possible to do a 6 month or a year WAN rollout, like it was in the past, right? I mean, I've seen many large banks that are still, still trying to roll out SD-WAN after 2 or 3 years, right? It's just a long process. They have very complicated networks. The move towards less complexity in the network means that, I'm going to have to normalize. I'm going to have to use services that I didn't use before. I think the time to market pressures will dictate that.
Now, let me throw something out before William. I'll throw it to you here for your thoughts on moving ahead. But I want to ask a tough question, Steve. What something you just said? Are networks becoming less complex, or we just want them to be less complex to operate? I mean, are the networks really less complex?
So think about when you had everything going through a router and a switch only. You're not doing anything to the packet. It's just going on its merry way. Now look at a packet from source to destination, how many things it goes through, how it's manipulated, torn apart, put back together. Sorry, Steve. I should have let you answer.
But for a purpose, I mean, and that's my point, is that we are doing stuff with data, with intention to a packet in ways we, certainly weren't even thinking about them in the early 90s. By the late 90s, we were getting going with traffic management with intention, and things just took off like from there. Add on a double helping of security, and I see a lot more complexity than less. But we're talking about operating, I think. Is that fair? Or just call me out, right? It's fine.
I think that's fair. I think underlying networks are as complex as they ever were, right? But what we're trying to do is take some of that complexity out of the user's hands. In other words, hey, I'm not just giving you a bunch of uncommitted infrastructure and you know, it's a canvas for you to draw everything on. You create everything yourself. That's the old way we used to do things. Now we're giving you essentially moving up the chain to like service-based or use case-based type of operation, right? So that is one level of, you know, simplification and abstraction. But I think we're going to move even beyond there, right? In terms of, you know, moving up the chain, you know, like I said, now it's like, hey, if I want to connect to cloud, yes, I can give you some automation tooling that, you know, configures the routers to do that and builds the connections. But if I consume that as a service from a, you know, an SDCI provider, I literally can do that through API calls from my orchestrator. All I have to do is get a port on their network, and then basically an API call builds the entire connection in through the cloud. That's kind of another level up of abstraction. I don't even really care what's going on underneath the covers. What kind of network technology did they use? Was it carrier Ethernet? Was it segment routing? Do I care? I don't know if I do, right? It's only the services that are exposed to me that are important. So when I talk, you know, to service providers, I say the same thing, right? You have this wonderful segment routing network that you're building. On top of that network, you can build really cool services. But how are you going to expose that to your customer, right? Do you really want the customer to help, you know, to build that on top of your infrastructure, or do you want to just expose the service and then let the customer consume that service and you sell that service, right? So yeah.
All right, so just so we're clear, I wasn't trying to be a jerk about it. What I really want to get at is that you know, William, to your point, that we're doing more. And the network is delivering more value to the customer, right? And I think that needs to be part of the message. You know, when we deal with this cultural issue, is, you know, that, you know, network managers, you know, whoever it is, the CIO talking to the CEO, wherever that conversation needs to have when they're trying to pitch why we need to move and implement these new technologies, it's so we can increase business value, the complexity that is created sometimes through our business requirements, and we can do it in an agile way, so we can deliver that business value and do it with velocity. And I think that's the story that I want to leave people with. It's all about business. It's all about, you know, business value and being able to tell that story. And a great way to do it is you know, read the playbook and get involved. So Steve, let's wrap up with you know, what the team's doing. You've got a lot of stuff on your plate here.
Yeah, so the team, basically what we're heading for next is essentially a test bed to demonstrate all this in Onug Falls. So the thing we want to do is, you know, basically work with different service providers, and, you know, from the network side, from the orchestration side, and show how you can basically build the stack up in pieces with API-based control in between, right? And so I can leverage somebody's orchestration on top of another provider's network very easily using these APIs to build connections to cloud, to build connections between different sites on my network. And so I think that's the use case that we want to kind of be able to show. So we want to kind of build a test bed, you know, at each layer, including security, and show how this can all be put together in, you know, build networks on demand very quickly.
That's awesome. All right, parting shots. I'll just go around the horn. Mike, any parting shots on APIs?
No
pressure.
No pressure. No. If I'm going to leave anybody with anything here, I would say, you know, get into using these things as soon as possible. If you're not, you know, focused on using APIs and automation, do it as soon as possible, and you'll see the value quickly. As long as you make sure that you have your, you know, if you're an executive looking at this and saying, like, you know, what's my value, you will see immediate returns once you start automating things, and you'll free up people's time to do more important things.
Mike, you did a great job presenting at Onug Spring too, by the way, and you know, that was a great way to, you know, really see the value of what your story is all about. So I appreciate that. William, how about you? Any parting shots from the API discussion?
Well, that was great advice right there. So, you know, 32% of cloud spending is wasted, according to Flexera, their most recent State of the Cloud report. 32%. What are you going to do about it, though?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to get out there and do something about it. And, new platforms out there, like if, we launched, actually, it was at this last ONUG, Cloud Insights. You can start using that for free. Get in there and play around with it. There's a lot of tools out there that have trial periods. What's stopping you from going and trying things out? That's the only way that you're going to be able to get your feet wet. We're not living in the 90s and the early 2000s where you had to forklift all this hardware in and, build everything up physically. You can do it from the privacy and the comfort of your own home while you're eating popcorn and sipping tea.
Nice.
Go out there and do it.
Yeah.
So, Steve, I do live in the 90s emotionally, but that's not what William's talking about. So give us your final parting shots, man.
So you know what? I thought that I was going to talk about protocols for the rest of my career, and I rarely have a conversation about protocols anymore. So all that knowledge is wasted, man. It's all gone. So,
Right.
I'm in the same boat, the cultural change that people are talking about here, right? Like I work more along the lines of trying to research and understand, where are we going, where are APIs going, where are software-based, programming methods and object-oriented methods going? How does the web work, right? I didn't have to care about that stuff. That was like, hey, I don't care. It's just something in the packet, right? Now you care because that's where I think we're headed. That's super exciting, right? I mean, if I have another protocol discussion, hopefully it's over martinis. I don't want to scare anybody away, right? Because you're the life of the party when you talk about BGP. Everybody comes over.
We're just scared of
right?
you and Martini. We're just scared of you and martinis. But
There
like
you go.
William likes both kinds of music, country and Western. I like both protocols, TCP and IP. So it's all coming together. All right, this has been great. Hopefully also everyone who's listening gets what this team's all about. Great working together, great working with this team. I'll give a shout out to ONUG in general and the working groups. These fine people, William, Mike, and Steve, are part of the Network Cloud Working Group. We've got a bunch of other working groups. The Cloud Security Notification Framework lives under ACG, or Automated Cloud Governance. We've got an Orchestration and Automation Working Group, and we have a Cloud Native Security Working Group. There's a very good chance we'll be standing up a Policy as Code and DevSecOps working group in 2022 at ONUG. You could find out about it by going to onug.net today and checking out. I want to say thanks again to Steve, Mike, and what's his name? William. That's it. Steve, Mike, and William, thanks for being with me today. And on behalf of the ONUG community, thanks for joining us and listening.